that this idea that, that people mention that love is not a crime, I actually find that to be an emotional argument that doesn't really look at the reality of what happens. And that's what people say. It's consent to consenting adults, and they say the same thing about homosexuality, and they say the same thing about many other things, that this should not be something that is a crime, but ultimately Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who should decide what is allowed and what is not allowed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated this. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't come near to zina. إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً. It's a filthy thing to do. It's an evil thing. It's an evil way to go. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has consistently told us this.
And I suppose when you look at the Sharia in the whole, like you said, the importance of doing that, the fact that the free mixing is not allowed, and the niqab and the jilbab, and there's so many steps that prevent it to get into even this stage. Okay, let's look at the punishment itself. You described quite a gruesome picture. I'm going to have to put a disclaimer at the start of this video, I think. Men being bowed to the waist, women being bowed to the chest, being stoned. Are people throwing these stones?
People are throwing stones. They're not allowed to curse the person. The Prophet prohibited them from cursing the person.
Okay.
Some of the scholars said the Imam should be the first one to throw the stone, or the Qadi should be the first one, because the Qadi is the one who made the pronouncement. Some of them said this.
Okay. Did any of the scholars say like how long this might take? Like, is it half an hour, an hour?
I looked into this.
Yeah.
So I have some statistics on this in terms of methods of the death penalty. So definitely beheading. I know it's going to be a bit gruesome, right?
Yeah, so, okay. I'm sure you had an interesting evening the other night when you looked into it.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone looks at my Google history, it's all like beheading, stoning to death, lethal injection. So beheading, typically, if it's done mercifully and properly with a sharp sword, should take around about 2 seconds before the person loses consciousness, and around about 8 to 10 seconds before the person is clinically dead.
Okay.
In terms of electric shocks, typically the electric chair now is considered it was only used in the States and one other country, I believe. And it is in many places now considered to be cruel and unusual punishment. There have been people who have taken over half an hour to die because of botched, not having it set up properly, and things like that.
But normal circumstances?
Normal circumstances, it's supposed to be quite quick, the issue of electrocution. But it's not been consistent if you look at the number of people who've been electrocuted and the number of times that it hasn't worked properly for one reason or another is quite significant. Gas chambers take roughly somewhere in the region of 11 minutes, which is why they're not really used very commonly. And lethal injection, again, has had a mixed result. If it's done properly, it's supposed to be relatively quick, within a couple of minutes or so. But it's not unheard of to take between 30 to 45 minutes for a person to die from a lethal injection, particularly the feeling that they may be paralyzed and in pain for that period of time. Short hanging was another one. Short hanging, 10 to 20 minutes of choking to death. And long hanging is actually the closest one to beheading, which is where they measure the length of the rope. And that one should be, again, if it's done properly and measured correctly, it should be instantaneous.
Okay.
In terms of stoning to death, I couldn't find a specific amount of time. However, it takes a very long time if the stones are very small, and it is relatively instantaneous if the stone is huge.
Really? If it's massive, huge. So, okay,
But it causes instant unconsciousness.
Yeah.
So a one that doesn't cause instant unconsciousness, it shouldn't be, and the ulama of fiqh mentioned this, it shouldn't be a prolonged suffering. That's not the purpose of it. It should be something which is not prolonged. I have seen reports of it taking several minutes, but those reports were, as far as we can see, in countries where it's not properly regulated. And it wasn't, for example, people throwing like small stones and things like that. So it shouldn't be something, and this is something in all of the punishments, the scholars mention, that the purpose of the punishment is to punish. It's a punishment. But it's not to cause unnecessary suffering beyond the punishment that is described in the Quran. And it's not to cause someone to be, punished for this huge length of time.